Hello everybody, this is Johns Hopkins with Baltimore Heritage, and we're back with another of our 5-Minute Histories videos. And today I'm going to talk about two structures that I bet you know. The building behind me, the observatory here in Patterson Park. Then I'm going to hop over to Druid Hill Park and talk about another observatory, a building called the Moorish Tower over there. You've probably seen it, the little white building on the edge of the reservoir in the park as you're heading up 83. Both buildings are observatories. You could climb up to the top and take a look around. They're also both known as what's called landscape architectural follies. Follies not because they're silly, but because in addition to having a purpose, an observatory, they also were intended to look unusual and interesting and spark conversations. Before we talk about our structures here in Baltimore, let me say a word about follies in general. They got going in the 1600s and 1700s in England and France as noble families were tricking out their country estates, building new chateaus and whatnot. Some of them hired designers to plan out the landscapes around them, make sure the trees went there and the shrubs went over there and there were winding paths between them. And some of them went even further and had their designers design structures that were interesting to look at, maybe spark a conversation with your strolling companion. And that's what they were intended to do. They came in all sorts of shapes and sizes. There were Roman temples, Egyptian pyramids, medieval castles and abbeys. There were rustic mills. Some of the best known follies, one in England, one at Stowe, a Gothic temple, really fabulous. Another one called King Alfred's Tower at Stourhedge. Over in France, some of the best known examples, in Ermenonville, France, I hope I said that right, the Temple of Philosophy that was left half completed to show that the quest for knowledge never ends. And then Marie Antoinette at Versailles built a number of follies, including one called the Love Monument. In the United States, in about the 1800s, we picked up this architectural landscape feature, and we built follies. Some of the best known, Kingfisher Tower in Oswego Lake, New York, a wonderful place called Bishop Castle outside of Pueblo, Colorado, and we're still doing it today. Watts Towers in Los Angeles is often called a folly, as is a thing called the Vessel in New York, both very recent. In the United Kingdom, there's even a nonprofit organization called the Folly Fellowship that is dedicated to preserving and promoting architectural follies. In the United States, as our trade with China and Asia increased, we started to pick up and get inspired by architecture features over there. Think Japanese bridges and Chinese pagodas, which brings us over here to Patterson Park and the observatory. We got our observatory here in Patterson Park in 1892, designed by a bridge builder and engineer, Charles Latrobe. If you've ever been inside the observatory and you've seen the structural steel, it is not hard to imagine that a bridge builder designed it. At 60 feet tall, it was part of a growing park. What had been a small parcel set aside to dedicated to the Battle of Baltimore in the War of 1812 was growing. It had winding paths, it had plantings of trees, it had other structures that were pleasing to look at, and the observatory fit right in. We believe that Latrobe was inspired by a particular building at Kew Gardens in London called the Great Pagoda, which in turn was inspired by a tower in Nanjing, China, that unfortunately is no longer there. When it was built, the original name was Observatory. That's what Latrobe called it. That's what everybody called it. Over the years, it began to be known colloquially as the Pagoda. Over the last several years, the Department of Recreation and Parks, which owns the building, and the Friends of Patterson Park, the nonprofit organization that's the steward of the building, have made a conscious shift to calling it back to its original name, the Observatory, out of respect for its history and out of respect for what it is and what it isn't. We at Baltimore Heritage believe that history matters and language matters and happily embrace the original name, Observatory. All right, one more word on that before we jump over to Druid Hill Park. By the 1990s, the observatory was in really bad shape. It was closed and looking terrible, but the new Friends of Patterson Park back then, with an enormously ambitious master plan for the park, chose the observatory as this sort of first signature restoration project to kick off a larger restoration project in the park. And today, both the park and the observatory look fantastic. 20 years later, it has been closed for several months to get it structurally solid enough again for people to climb up to the top. But this spring, we hopefully all will be able to go back up and take a look around as you could back in 1892. All right, let's stop there and head over to Druid Hill Park. All right, we've jumped over here to Druid Hill Park, and I'm standing on the edge of the reservoir in the park, and behind me is the other observatory we're going to talk about today, what's known as the Moorish Tower. I said it was a little white building. It's actually not so little. It is over 30 feet tall, and it is in no way fragile. Its walls in part are made of marble stones 18 inches thick. Like the observatory in Patterson Park, this too was an observatory. You could climb up a set of spiral stairs in the middle, get to the top, and have a fabulous view of the Jones Falls Valley. And like the observatory in Patterson Park, it was an architectural folly. It was meant to be part of a landscaped park and meant to be interesting to look at. Druid Hill, of course, is one of the nation's oldest landscape parks. The tower came in 1870. The reservoir was completed with a walking path around it in 1871. The zoo was completed in 1876, and the conservatory in 1888, making this really a premier Victorian sort of green escape in the middle of the city. The building itself has fabulous architecture as well, in addition to its size and shape. If you look at the windows, they look like clubs on a deck of playing cards. And Jacques Kelly, I think, really nailed it, the Baltimore Sun writer, when he said it looks like something you could put on a chessboard. I think that's about right. Unlike Patterson Park, though, we don't believe there was any single other piece of architecture that inspired the Moorish Tower here. Just Moorish architecture in general. As landscape architects in the Victorian era were turning to Asia for inspiration, they were also turning to places like Morocco and Algeria, Spain, and Tunisia. Some architectural historians call this architecture of the Islamic West. The term Moorish gets to us because Western Europeans called the inhabitants of those areas Moors, and that's what's generally stuck. In addition to towers like this, some Moorish-inspired architecture that you might see around are horseshoe arches, religious towers called minarets that are from that part of the world, and then, of course, all of the wonderful tile work that makes its way both inside and outside buildings here in the United States. All right, I'm going to wrap up by saying, kind of like the observatory in Patterson Park, this building by the 1990s was in terrible shape. The city, in fact, had contemplated tearing it down. Luckily, advocates for the park convinced the city to save it, and the city did a wonderful restoration job on it, shoring up the foundation and repairing all of the stonework. Today, the iron spiral stair on the inside is no longer there, and the door is securely shut, but it is still a fantastic part of this landscaped Druid Hill Park. I'll invite you to come out and take a look, either here in the winter or in the spring, maybe, as the big project in the reservoir hopefully gets completed sometime soon. All right, thanks so much, and we'll see you next time.